All right, guys, joining us today on the podcast is Samuel Austin. Samuel is a digital wizard who, through his platform, SamAustinDesign.com, utilizes his creativity and technological expertise for the betterment of humanity and nature. He is also the founder of Live, Learn, Evolve, a digital platform publishing some of the most profound and thought-provoking content around self-realization, spirituality, philosophy, art and science, with the aim to drive the emergence of a more conscious humanity. Sam also created an upcoming documentary, Awakening the Soul, a deep dive into the emerging psychedelic plant medicine scene, exploring how and why ayahuasca is so profoundly effective at revolutionizing people's lives and catalyzing miraculous healing. So with that, it's an honor to welcome you on to the show, Sam. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So Sam, we've heard a little bit about you from Les, just some cliff notes, I guess. What would be really interesting for us and the audience is if you could tell us about your origin story and Samuel Austin, how you've come to be where you are today, as far back as you'd like to go and as much detail you'd like to tell us. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I guess in terms of how these projects that you talk about came together and how that first got catalyzed, I guess I fell into computers very naturally in my teens, and like just totally took it up upon myself and started to really self-teach everything I could around design, like using Photoshop since I was like 13 years old, and just running with it, and really just becoming actually addicted to the internet. It was like such a natural flow that I just ended up going through, and everything was about computers, and learning how to be creative through the medium of technology. And along that pathway, I went on many sort of, I guess, rabbit holes from an early age of like sort of what is reality and what's actually going on. And that led me through various, looking at stuff like aliens and UFOs and ghosts as a kid, and then starting to look in different places around philosophy. And I was really just a massive seeker, until, several years later, I've got 28 tabs open all the time, and I was just a persistent seeker of truth. And I guess I was really just a deep seeker from the get-go. And eventually, at some point, that led me to question things so much that the life I was living at the time didn't resonate anymore with where what I deeply felt was true. And this sort of was catalyzed by me working as a video editor for world-class DJs and following them all around the world, and getting into all these sort of exclusive circles and events, and starting to understand how like the super rich live and how they spend their time and so on. So I felt like I was catapulted right up into the hedonistic world of the extreme, basically, of how far you can go. And I'm sure you guys can imagine. And I quickly like sort of saw through the veil, was left very, I guess, disenfranchised by the whole thing. So everyone was telling me that like I had the most successful, amazing job, and I'd really made it and so on. But I was seeing through it all. And so when I came back down, it was such a hard sort of rock for me that I was exhausted by all of these DJ tours and trips and sort of very luxury explorations and experiences throughout the world, that one day I was walking through the airport after a long tour, and I stumbled across, I guess, the Eckhart Tolle book, Power of Now, and it just came to me in that moment. And when I read that, it sort of totally blew open my reality map to suddenly orient me to this thing called like presence or mindfulness, which was completely abstract and I'd never sort of looked at it before. But it sort of in reading the book, it caused a catalyst, almost like I woke up while reading the book. That's what it felt like. I was like, wow, like looking down at hands, like, what is this? I'd never realized this before. This just being here is really strange and awesome. And for whatever reason, that in my mind now, just speaking out seemed to be the first thing that really catalyzed me to go down this route and start to explore, set up, live, learn, evolve. And I quit my job in the city. I moved back. I had no plans whatsoever. I just was following this intuitive calling. I started to really seek online and read all these different philosophy books and religious texts and everything to more deeply comprehend what this was, and I guess look at how other people were explaining the same thing through different reality maps in that way, and help comprehend it more. And yeah, eventually that just led me onto psychedelics and all the other ways of looking to expand consciousness, meditation, doing Vipassana, just really, really diving into any ontological challenge that appeared to me to expand consciousness in some form. And I just threw myself at all of those things. And that somehow led me up to this position right here, right now, on this podcast with the projects that you read out at the moment. And there's lots of other weaves there, but yeah, that's an overall roundup, I guess, of it.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Very interesting. And like, I know I myself, I've obviously interacted with you quite a bit this particular year, and I know you've landed now in Costa Rica, which is again this amazing sort of following of intuitive calling, right? And like, what I want to bring you back to is this notion of seeking and being a seeker for as long as you've known. And I know that many people, myself included, they can be, I guess, they will be awakened to the desire to seek, but it seems like you've had it at a very young age. So tell me about your childhood, and like, what do you put that down to in terms of where that seeking, intuition, or that gravitation towards seeking came from?
Yeah, it's new to me, but I recently seem to have had the revelation that it actually came from an early trauma of what I thought wasn't a trauma, and I downplayed it for years. But when my parents split up when I was around 16 years old, I tried to like downplay it completely, and I didn't really like process. I properly shut down. And what I did instead was, rather than process or face any of it, I went to the internet. And that's what ended up me rampantly seeking to understand or to find connection, I guess, to some extent. So there was a big shift there, and through plant medicine and psychedelics, it has come back to that many times. That particular moment of me witnessing the young Samuel in his room, sort of like really turning away and then turning to seek at the same time, to understand. And yeah, there's something in everyone that seems to ignite this seeking process. And I think it's absolutely essential to begin committed seeking for whatever it is. And then, of course, naturally at some stage, you find that what you seek is the thing that is doing the seeking. And so the orientation flips from seeking to seeing that what's looking is the process of seeing, of consciously actually looking and perceiving and being present. And it's like, wow, it's here. What was I looking for? But I guess that switch happens for everyone at different times and in different places and in different contexts. From what I've observed in this journey is that sort of seeking and finding is seasonal, in to the degree that sometimes I'm seeking something new and other times I'm just integrating and noticing that what I was looking for was what I am. And I seem to oscillate between those things, those processes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring up this, I guess, this childhood trauma that you experienced. And this is something that, you know, many of our guests who have come onto the podcast, and, you know, myself included, we always think about this and we ask ourselves this question, whether there is a necessity for these types of experiences in order for us to essentially blast open the doors of conditioned perception, you know, in order to then, you know, pick you up and turn you around and face you towards that which you have been ignoring or not been essentially, you know, doing the work or facing all of your life up to that point. You know, mine was cancer. I've told this story many times on the podcast and I won't repeat it, but we always ask this question, and it seems like some form or severity of trauma needs to occur, and it has to be a very personal experience for one to then perceive life or their reality through a different lens, through a lens which is, it seems, more pure, you know, more aligned to truth. So it's an interesting thing.
Yes. Huge topic. Comes up a lot in the plant medicine world. I don't have deep, tragic trauma in the same way that I've witnessed other people have it. But I've noticed that the downplaying of trauma is also an issue, because it seems that what is trauma for someone is not trauma for someone else. And it's, as you say, it's in relation to the individual. And what I do know in my experience is that when I do ignore the intuitive callings, when I do ignore the whispers of the soul, of the heart, the degree of reminders that I get from the internal world increase, and then they'll keep increasing. And if I don't pay attention, suddenly the external signals will start to increase until eventually nature, universe, whatever you want to call it, seems to knock me off my track in some big way to point me back into alignment, because I've not been paying attention. And for some people, that's perhaps a traumatic experience, or it causes a dark night of the soul. But I really believe that there's some kind of universal law that when we're tuned into it, the more that we tune into it, the consequences increase for not listening to it. This becomes obvious with the plants, because they point out to you really fast. And that's why I say that nature or the universe seems to do that, because the plants can talk and they're highly intelligent. And there are a number of master teacher plants that are out there that when we communicate with them, it's almost indefinitely the first thing they go to. It's trauma. It's whatever blocks from early conditioning that are there that are then shown to us, whether appropriate or not, whether in the grand scheme of things they needed to happen, I don't know, because I can't speak to stuff like previous lives or soul contracts or any of these other sort of concepts that often come up in the New Age realm, because I don't know any of that. I'm sealed, completely hermetically sealed on any past lives or any of that kind of thing. I don't know. But I do know that they end up being precisely what you say, the most powerful catalysts for spiritual growth across the board and just evolution in general. So I absolutely resonate with what you're saying.
One thing that we often talk about as well, Samuel, is there are things that people are ignoring in their lives, and we don't really know how it's affecting us until we have these catalytic moments. But we wonder, does it take, what does it actually take for that to come to the forefront? And is it just one way to do it? You've started speaking to us now about like the plants and how they reveal that to you. And I've never experienced, I haven't gone on any plant medicine journeys myself. But I know a lot of people that have, and I've read into it and researched a lot about it. And you said one really interesting thing there, which is your trauma or what's blocking you is the first thing it always goes to. And that really intrigues me. Would you be able to talk more about that and how that comes about from your own experience?
Yeah. So in the process of when I first went to plant medicine, I went there to make a documentary from never interacting with ayahuasca before. So I turned up almost from a journalistic perspective of having a series of questions. And I thought, oh, cool, I've read all this stuff about how you can communicate with the plants. So I'll basically have all these interview questions of like, here's my 1 hour with Mother Ayahuasca. Let me interview you and I'll get all this stuff and I'll put that into the documentary. Won't that be cool? And so I sat down, I drank the medicine, I had all these questions. And straight away, what happened was it showed up with these visions and I showed up with my questions. And this feminine presence came in and said, I do not give a shit about your questions. Let's put all of that in the bin, because you're just all mind. You're coming here with the wrong thing. You're just the wrong approach. What we're going to do is we're going to dive into the real work. And it went straight to childhood trauma, straight to that. It was consistently showing me how this orientation, this mental orientation of approaching her was not going to work out. That it had to be me shifting from seeing sort of from the mind and trying to intellectualize things to feeling and communicating from the heart space, because that's the only way I could listen. So I don't know why that seems to be the case for everyone. I guess because the plant is healing, and the main healing really occurs when we begin to look at, accept, and clear those things that have happened to us, because our culture is one of avoiding, numbing pain and trauma. And we've been taught to do that. And especially as men here, taught not to feel and show our emotions, but actually taught how to numb them, with the general masculine plateaus of, be a man or whatever that is. So, so perhaps that's the core of where the civilization and society has shifted away from nature. It's from the absence of receptivity to really feeling what we are, who we are, and also what we're doing in relationship to the earth, our home, our mother, and ultimately also the feminine, which is the feminine spirit, the feminine within each one of us, regardless of gender. And I feel like the plants are doing that because that is the most effective, most evolutionary path for everyone to concentrate on right now, because it is so imbalanced between the masculine and feminine, let's say, in an ego-dominated culture that we're in at the moment, which is hyper masculine. And perhaps that's only seasonal. Perhaps that is only seasonal because it's happening right now. It just needs that shift right now. I don't know if 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, people were taking medicine, it was like, now we're hyper feminine, we need hyper masculine, you know? So when you go into the medicine, it was teaching other ways. I don't know. I can see that being very appropriate. And that's why right now it seems hyper appropriate that they're the sort of issues that people are going into immediately, yeah, in this time, in this era.
Yeah, and I think we can sort of, when we talk about, you know, individual trauma and how it sort of manifests for each individual on a personal level, right? And we can sort of extrapolate that out and look at the world at large and this current sort of landscape. You know, 2020, we're recording this in September, and you know, we look at the COVID and everything that is happening in this world, this you know, racial inequality, all these sorts of things. It is just a, you know, like a macro representation of exactly what you said, this huge imbalance. It's like a shake up to say, at large, we're being shown this, you know, because we've been ignoring these signals for such a long time. And this is how things are coming up. It's coming to a boiling point. And you can look back in, you know, various, you know, historical events that may or may not have been similar, you know, sorts of points of mass trauma for us to essentially learn a lesson. And like, I always look back, you know, we always have this boastful sort of egoic view on who we are as people at large, that we're so great, that we've come so far, we've developed so much. And it's not to downplay how far humanity has come, but there is also a need for a level of humility to step back and say that we are still learning, we are still young as a civilization, as a society. We are still young, we are still learning, you know. We don't know anything. We know fuck all, you know. And these are the types of things that will happen if we just continually think that we know it all, that we continually fucking push forward with this, like, you know, hedonistic way of life. The you know, Mother Nature is going to tell us, you know, these are the laws that we cannot control, you know. We've written these laws, these human laws that we can manipulate because we have control over them. But human nature, we cannot, you know, we are naive to think that we have power over nature, you know. So yeah, I mean, I think everything that is happening to this point, again, is like a representation of that at a large scale.
Absolutely. Even I feel like even the divide there between like nature and human nature is one that exists basically only within semantics.
Totally.
Like, we talk about human nature as if it's separate, and now we're starting to realize that, okay, we're not there. There's no actual separation beyond the mind-made boundaries.
Totally.
That the psychedelics are dissolving because they're boundary dissolvers, and there are also many other ways to do that, but yeah, that is what you've expressed there is the core message of the psychedelics too. Yeah.
And like, I wanted to go back and bring you back to this past life that you lived, and this, like, you know, basically thrust into the elite of hedonism. I want you to tell me about that experience. And like, you were very clear as to firstly, what experiences that you had within that life, but also very clear about how that sort of pointed you away from the, I guess, the heart, essentially, right? Tell me how you came to that like realization, because like I said, a lot of people, like again, me included, it took me a very long time to come to the realization. Maybe not come to the realization, but have the courage to face it or actually question it, you know, to ask those big questions and just say, okay, I'm going to step back from this life, this fast-paced life that is stroking the ego, essentially, to really step into the discomfort and question what it is that is making me feel so uncomfortable. You know, that analogy, the splinter in the mind, you know?
Yeah, well, I feel like this was the first. I've always worked as a freelance solo creative. This job that took me around the world happened very quickly, out of nowhere, very spontaneous, and within 2 weeks of being in the job, I was already being flown to Miami to shoot videos for DJs, to tour with them and everything. And I was actually I was blagging my way into the job too. I didn't know how to make videos. I was fully trusting in this intuitive flow to learn on the go, and I was picking up a camera and I was like, oh my God, I'm really in the deep end here, you know? So for whatever reason, I've always been following this intuitive, like trust in whatever intelligence and go with it. And I think perhaps because it was such a quick escalation right to the top, to seeing what this extreme hedonism was like. And I'm talking about being in Miami at the peak of all the music festivals, in private clubs, and you know, there's all sorts of substance abuse all over the place. There's celebrity DJs, and I'm also involved in some experiences of mediating substances between celebrities as well, which I was thrust into. And I've never done that sort of thing. You know, it's just one specific spontaneous time that it happened that was a big catalyst for me. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? You know, I'm passing cocaine between these very famous people, and this is strange. And then I see those people later overdosing and being dragged out of the club from cocaine abuse and stuff too. So because you asked that question, I'm reminded of those specific experiences, which I think caused a, let's say, splinter in the mind, where I'm like, hang on, something's up here. And then since I was on, you know, at some points I was on airplanes like 19, 20 times a year, going to Ibiza back and forth, going to all these different places all the time. And planes are very, very interesting places for reflection, thinking time. I did a lot of journaling, and that's when I was reading Power Up Now, picking it up from one of the airports. So I guess experiences just culminated together to give me that exact moment I need to really cause that catalyst and look at things differently. But also, since you ask, it was around those times that I was also introduced to mushrooms for the first time. And recently, people have asked questions of like, you know, what happened to your past? Like, how did you understand this so early, like you asked earlier? And upon reflection, I think I might be downplaying the role that the plants had in my journey too. It was a moment when I was 23 that I actually first got introduced to them. And the experience was very much one of boundary dissolving, of realizing that I wasn't connected to my soul and my heart, and getting into this receptive feminine flow, and being shown that nature was being destroyed, and the parts that I was playing in that. So I just want to make note of that, because whilst I don't always like to be advocating psychedelics, I'm not one to just be always pushing psychedelics at, all the time as a way to enlightenment. I'm just noting that in my life, they've played such a big catalyst that I feel a responsibility to mention that, because meditation and yoga have played huge parts. Certain non-dual books and teachers have played huge parts. But since we're talking about those events that catalyze, and we're talking about direct experience, ontological shifts, you know, those shifts happen in the moment, in the body, directly, not from secondary sources. And so psychedelics have been the main proponent of those.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And it's thank you for, you know, reiterating that point. And like, you know, every time we talk about these types of things like psychedelics and plant medicine and things like this on the podcast, it's very important to note, you know, that there is a time and place for those type of things, just like anything. And just like the other tools that you mentioned, you know, meditation, yoga, reading, ancient wisdom, these types of things, they're tools, right? They are not, you know, answers to, like, they're not external answers that we should seek in that way. If we're looking at them in this way, in this fashion, then it's a sign that we're not perhaps ready for that type of thing, you know? Like I myself, I've done, I've sought the wisdom of plant medicine a couple of times, also from Mother Ayahuasca and also Grandfather Huachuma, and both times, whenever I'm asked about those experiences, I will also have to preface that there was a very palpable calling, you know, to meet those, you know, plant teachers, and it's very important to know, you know, like. And like you say, like meditation is my personal main tool. That is my main tool of doing the moment to moment work, essentially, right? And we can call upon any of these things, but like you say, and it's so important to point out, is that the healing and the cure, it all is within. It happens within us, you know. It is not to be sought outside of ourselves. And that is really important for everyone to understand it and acknowledge and recognize, you know, if you are seeking true healing of the heart and the soul, it must be from a place within. It must, you know, there is no other way.
Absolutely. I've seen such a massive degree of spiritual bypassing and misuse of psychedelics and unearned wisdom, as Carl Jung put it, when it comes to people using psychedelics, and then sort of the ego in its very subtle ways claiming ownership of these new, more metaphysical ideas, since its physical structure has been blown apart from the identity being dissolved. And then as the ego seems to integrate, it seems to come down and take hold of certain ideas that have been learnt through the psychedelics. But then without the actual embodiment, the action, the conscious action and change and responsibility to use those insights to make difference in your life directly, these ideas, they're just like metadata on a camera picture. You know, it was shot on f3.5 ISO 100. It means nothing. It's wordplay. And there's a lot of like, because I've seen it in myself, that's why I'm talking about it, and so I see it in others. A lot of it can be a lot of mental gymnastics of ways of avoiding actually doing the integration work from these things too. And then also on that note of psychedelics, of course, you need to feel intuitively called to it, not to be doing it just because you want to tick it off a bucket list 100%. And then there's also the approach of, even when it comes to the way drugs and psychedelics are labeled, like, is a real weird thing too, because I feel like pro-psychedelic movement is actually, it's largely an anti-drug movement. It really is. because it's against all of these addictive stimulants and any behavior really that is having someone avoid being connected to their soul. Like all of the amphetamines, the heroin, the cocaine, the nicotine, the alcohol, the coffee, even like the porn, the internet addiction, anything, it's mainly an anti-addiction movement, an anti-drug movement, really. That's what I feel like. So if I, like in this moment, I'd say if I was to label the way this is orientated, I would see it the more that the things that naturally grow in the ground, that nature has been spent tens of millions of years evolving these very specific molecules to exist within all of nature, like DMT, which is supposedly in 95% of all plants anyway. They're the ones to be paying attention to, because Mother Nature's the master alchemist, the master biologist, biochemist. You know, these things are here for a reason. The other ones, the ones that are synthesized in a lab, when you synthesize them, you take out the spirit of the plant. The pharmaceuticals, these things, it removes the spirit. That's why when we take the natural ones, we come into contact with the spirit, and then we get told these things. So I just think it's perhaps not happened yet, and I think maybe it would be a good thing is to shift around even the way we semantically divide the substances as well.
That's an excellent point, Samuel. Like sometimes people just say things in a certain way that it clicks for people, and I've just had that moment now with you, right? And it's in how it's explained and actually the perspective we take, right? Because I know for a fact there are so many people that they hear the word psychedelic and they think it's just people taking drugs in the forest, right? And it's not what it's about at all, like at all. And what's really interesting and something that I've synthesized from what you've just explained is all the drugs, the actual drugs that people are taking that are synthesized, pharmaceuticals, things like that, they're diversionary, right? They're trying to take you to a different place from where you are, or stop you from feeling certain things that you're actually feeling. They're diverting the spirit, right? Whereas Absolutely. What you've explained with the plant is that it does have a spirit. And when you sit with the plant and you have that experience, it's actually, you're having that internal experience and you're facing the things and experiencing the things that are within you. You're not being diverted. You're being called down the path that you should be traveling down. And I think it's such an important distinction, and one that you've really just flipped for me and opened for me in my mind now.
Yeah, big shift. It's even interesting to read on some of the indigenous approaches to these medicines, in that they can talk of how, just 2 or 3 good ayahuasca sessions mediated in the proper way, and you might well already solve all those issues. It's different to modern medicine, because modern pharmaceuticals you need to keep taking to stop the symptoms or to keep the healing going most of the time. But the plants, you actually need less and less because they're healing. So we need them less and less. We don't need to keep taking them to keep it up. It's just very, very different. Very different. I think we're just all in a process of remembering, essentially, of remembrance back to nature in all of these different ways.
Yeah, that's a key word there, man. Remembrance, and that's essentially when we talk about all these things and like healing and back to source and coming home and all these things. It's like it's creating or turning us back to this to this idea and this innate knowing that we have greater power than we, really paint ourselves to have in this society, right? And we are just treating the root cause of the issue just to bring back our true human essence. And what we are here to innately do is our duty, to uphold these ideals as individuals, as humans brought here as part of nature, not the dominant force in nature, right? This is the wrong place to look at it. And perhaps these things, like we've talked about, like, in terms of the addictions and the distractions of hedonism, that's what it is, right? It's a distraction from looking inward. And maybe, perhaps that is by design, perhaps it's not. Who is to know, right? And I don't want to start going down this conspiracy rabbit hole of what it is and isn't. But as soon as we recognize that these things are distracting us from essentially the only task that we each as individuals have is to look inward and do the work, and then to express what it is that we innately want to express. There's nothing else, there's nothing else to it,
Yeah,
and I say
I really feel what you're saying.
And I say it like, very off the cuff to say there's nothing else to it, but in the same vein, there's a very simple concept, that I can voice, but it is the most difficult thing in practice that we can ever do. But there was a real, comfort in accepting this fact of life,
Yeah, and on that note, the big thing for me was recognizing that it is a process, that liberation or awakening or enlightenment, whatever we want to call it. I'm highly skeptical of anyone that talks of saying that they're finished, that it's done. There are some non-dual teachers out there that say I've seen now and it's done. But in my opinion, it's unending process, impermanent, cyclical, seasonal, and this is always changing.
Totally.
And I'm constantly shifting between the polarity of like feeling super connected to expressing what I am, essentially the source, the essence, the soul, and then being offered up a new challenge through a different context in my life that challenges me to stay connected to that. And sometimes I swing back and I get lost, and that's okay, because the swinging back and forgetting gives me contrast to what I'd forgotten. And by being in that polarity again and seeing that I'm lost, the contrast is so big that I now have more clarity on how to be more in alignment again. And they both are working together all the time. And so I don't even have a preference for each one. But I know that by staying with the breath, I'll be connected to this swinging oscillation, no matter which part of the process it's going through.
And I think it's such an important thing to highlight for people, that there's no beginnings and ends, just seasons and transitions, which is what you're explaining there, right? We're just constantly moving back and forth, forwards, backwards, up, down, sideways, in between these different just parts of the journey, right? And the challenges that you're facing is just one swing, giving you the contrast to the good, or things that you've come to know previously and reappreciate, really.
Yeah.
And I want to bring you back, Sam, to something that you were talking about in relation to, you were talking about seeking and how you've gone through these cycles of seeking when you've been looking for something and then you've been brought back and found that what you were looking for is actually within you. It's something that's been coming up for me, which is, it's this line that keeps ringing in my head. And actually I heard it in a song and it's just like rings in my head every day now. It's like, when you realize that everything you had is what you've been missing. And you spoke about this point in the, I guess, in the cycle of your seeking, where you've come to know that at different times, that what you thought you were seeking and what you thought you were looking for was actually within you, or you had known. Could you talk a bit more about that and that part of the cycle of in your seeking?
The part of returning.
The part of returning,
that?
yes, and how you've come to that realization.
Yeah, well, since as we're talking, it's a process of remembering. What we then come to understand is something that I was never apart from or didn't know already. I'd just forgotten it. And so it always seems to be when these, when real wisdom, real embodiment comes through to me, and I'm really taught by something, not just that I read it, but that I really understand it. I'm actually standing under understanding. I'm standing under language, because now I'm in the felt dimension and now I feel it to be real. And so the understanding is feeling, right? Whereas before I thought understanding was a mental thing where I could hold up an abstract concept. And then it's embodied, and then embodied like correlates to in the body. I'm being felt. Now the wisdom is here, it's in the body. And so I'm remembering. And so in all of these breakthrough experiences, well, I've really listened to whatever is happening, to the teaching that I'm being shown, because it's been on that felt dimension. It's been like, okay, it was already here. Now I'm remembering. And I think the significance of those experiences have somehow anchored me into through very hard experiences, let me say, like super hard. There's been like real dark nights of the soul, where I really had to swing far away to see it. But because I saw the light in those moments, they created deep anchors to remember, to feel and to see and to listen to what I am essentially when these great obstacles come at me in those ways. And I just think over time that's just the process that happens. This oscillating seems to build up that remembrance, and it seems to be at some point there's also a shift between, like before, where presence was new to me and I was oscillating between like presence and non-presence, like those moments where you're swiping on your phone and 30 minutes goes past and you're like, where did that go? To actually, there's at some point a shift for everyone where they're more in the present. They're like, say 51% in the present and 49% getting lost, and suddenly there's this remembrance of like, wow, now I've been seeking externally for it, and what I was looking for was always here. So now I'm going to stay with what's here. And then when I face obstacles, they end up taking me away, but I remember to be here again. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep. Totally feel you on that one. And thank you for going through that and explaining that for us.
So I want to draw this point back to, and this all like nicely marries back together, I feel. And this comes back to a point in a very interesting way to look at things in terms of like relating certain, texts or knowledge that people look up to or they worship as as reality maps, right? And when we think about reality maps and we talk about this, and then we sort of look at it in correlation with the cyclic nature or the pendulum swinging, you know, from back to forth, from, you know, perceived good and bad, or whatever, however you want to call it. It sort of implies that these are timestamps or understandings or interpretations at a point in time. And I'd love to, you know, just point that out for people, in that, yes, you know, there's great wisdom to be found in everything that has been written throughout history, right? But that is one perspective that has been recorded at a point in time. You know, just like any map, it evolves through the discovery of new landscapes, right? It's never going to be perfect. It will also evolve through the eroding of landscapes, right? So this constant change, it points at this constant change. The only constant is change, right? And when you talk about how these reality maps work and how they land for individuals, it's not like this speed reading thing where you're just reading all these books and say, yep, I've read The Power of Now, I've read the Tao Te Ching, I've read, you know, the Bible, all this, whatever it is, I've read X, Y, and Z, right? It's not about understanding it at an intellectual level. These maps, think of it as like a doorway into like this maze of yourself, you know? It's like the doorway, it's the entry point. But we still need to explore that. And where does it hit? Where do we feel it? Where do we actually hear it in the heart, you know? Not intellectualizing and saying, okay, yeah, I understand those words that have been written. But where does it land? What does it tell us? You know, which way is it pointing us in this maze, in this labyrinth, to remember it, essentially? And like this symbolism of the labyrinth is beautiful, because if we continually use these, you know, reality maps, it will eventually lead us back into the center, which is ourselves inside, you know? So I really just wanted to point that out for people. Like, it's just this, again, modern day society, we tend to want to rush, right? So we don't give ourselves the time or the space to be able to do such deep and rich explorations, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I so resonate with that. There's so many times where like I can't tell people what path to go on, what book to read. I often get asked, you know, on Live, Learn, Evolve, what do you recommend? What book should I read? You know, this kind of, what video should I watch, etc. I can't tell people. All I can say is that, you know, as we've discussed in this conversation and as we're learning, is that just listen. Just listen to those tiny little inspirations that arise within, to make leaps, to look in places, because the external reality seems to be guiding us all the time. We're just ignoring it. So always we can become more sensitive and more in a operation of listening, then we'll be guided that way. And for some people, they read Power of Now, yeah, and that becomes the catalyst. For other people, it's poetry or like just cooking or singing, whatever it is. It's different for everyone. And so they're all doorways, like you talk about. The doorways are infinite, you know, like one Zen patriarch, I think, said the great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences. The doors are open. It's just, for me, it's just about guiding or mirroring to people to listen so that they can follow the doors that are necessary for them. I can't tell you the path. There is infinite paths that way. But if you listen, you'll be guided always. But it always seems to be one step. Like we're wearing a head torch. If I tune in, I know to take the next step, but I can't see further than that because it's spontaneous, it's process, it's mystery. And that's the beauty of unraveling it. If we knew the path, it wouldn't be as exciting.
No, I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I think for a lot of people, there's this, I call it a desire. I don't know if it's, it's kind of been conditioned into us, but to just try and find the answer. But then it's like, what questions are you asking? Like, what's the question? If someone asks you that question of what's next for you, based on what happened before. Like if someone asks you, what book should I read? What video should I watch? To what quote unquote end? Like what answer are you seeking? And, as you said, it's the next step. Like with that head torch, you take the one and it unravels for you. But so many of us are in a rush to just try to get to that answer. And we're not even, I feel, asking the right questions of ourselves for what that answer is and what we want to be enlightened on.
And I think it comes down to this, this comparison society as well, right? There is this, atypical model that we all are told that we should, aim up towards or line up against, right? And there must be a paved path that we can strive towards. And there is, right? If we talk about within like the context of the matrix, right? There is obviously a paved path that can get you to this, high flying, whatever corporate that gets paid X amount and lives that luxe life. But just know that is a mask, that is a persona, that is not individual, that is not you, right? That is like that old paradigm of, conveyor belt processing, a cog in the big machine, right? If that in itself, that whole paradox or paradigm that we're looking at is firstly like it's created to obviously give us conditioned direction in the modern society that we live, but it is also created to distract us from what is within. And if you truly want to know the answers for yourself, know that they're not going to likely align to what is being sold to you out to the masses. And to accept that, firstly, that is a difficult thing in itself if you've been brought up and conditioned, all your life to walk that path. I did that for almost 3 decades. I worked in the financial services industry for over 10 years. I was getting paid a good amount of money. I was making a very good living, and I could have continued climbing this ladder, but I knew that obviously it wasn't who I am, and I'm like completely different now. Like, that is a past life for sure. So like, just understand that, again, you can open these doors, but it is the very opposite of what it truly is to walk through life, in discovering truth of self, right? Like you said, there's no better way to describe it. Like the path is truly pathless if you want to walk it. The path is only revealed through your next step, and that is it. Like this need to calcify things into definition and something that is tangible. It is so, I guess, converse to what it truly is about. Like I said before, if we're talking about the only constant is change, then to calcify is to be simply left behind whilst everything else is evolving around you.
Yeah, it just breeds stagnation, again, comfort zones.
Totally.
These heroes' journeys only start by literally leaping into the unknown.
That's it. That's it. All right, Sam. That was a rich conversation. I'm sure there were many other rabbit holes that we could dive through and, But what I want to invite you to do, mate, is to, I guess, just share with the audience, I mean, where they can find you, about your projects, anything at all, anything that you want to tell people about that's coming up for you, mate.
Yeah, well, I'm just wrapping up my first documentary called Awakening the Soul, which is a journey through the plant medicine world in Costa Rica. And I'm bloody ecstatic to be sharing it, to be honest, because it's been a year in the works, and I do feel like it does some justice to some deeper, more profound areas of ayahuasca and plants medicine that has not been journeyed across yet. So you can find that at awakeningthesoulfilm.com and get access to it as soon as it's released. And then in general, yeah, I guess I'm sometimes on Instagram at Wizard of Zen. And the website is Live, Learn, Evolve, which is where there's a whole range of rabbit holes of content of basically any topic that you might have heard on this post. You know, again, can't tell you what articles to look at, but if you go to the website and just listen, I'm sure you'll be guided down some very strange rabbit holes. So yeah, it's a good place to check out.
Awesome, man. And what we'll do, we'll just share all those links for the audience in our show notes so they can find you, mate. Shauno, where can people find you?
Yep. Easiest place to find me is just on Instagram. It's Shaun_Coop, SHAUN_COOP. You can just shoot me a message there and we can chat. And how about you, Les?
Yeah, so just find me on my website, findingspace.co. You can always get in touch and say good day. I'm also launching my meditation program very soon. So, you know, keep abreast of that if you want to sign up to the newsletter and get notified. Yeah, very exciting, that one. On socials, Facebook and Instagram, again, it's at findingspace.co if you want to get in touch with me that way. You can also touch base with Shaun and I through our email address. If you want to, you know, ask any questions or get in touch with Sam, you know, or ask any questions about previous podcast episodes, or come on as a guest, it's the Hustle and Flow podcast at gmail.com.
And before we head off, Sam, I just really want to thank you again for taking the time to be here, especially in another part of the world and aligning to our schedule. So thank you for that.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this trialogue. Super excited to do it again.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
We'd love to have you on again, man.
Yeah, we would absolutely love to have you on again. And, you know, I just really want to acknowledge you, Sam, for your candor. And you've got a really eloquent way of explaining things and, you know, provoking a different part of the thought center and also the heart center. You did that for me today in our discussion, something I'll definitely be returning to and ruminating on myself. And I'm sure that the people listening will have some of those moments as well. And if you're someone who has had one of those moments, we just ask that you share this podcast with one other person that you think may take something from it as well, that might enjoy the conversation. That's how we grow the podcast. And we'd love to get these conversations heard by more people to, you know, pluck those strings inside our minds and our hearts. So until next time, guys.
See you guys.
Thank you.